Case 1. Nichole Lynn Boyer. October 16, 2025. Beaverhead County District Court, Dillon, Montana. Beaverhead County is the largest county in Montana by land area. More than 5,500 square miles of high desert plateaus, mountain terrain, and cattle ranching country in the state's far southwestern corner. The county seat is Dillon, a city of roughly 4,000 people. Leannah, a small community near the Idaho border at the county's southern edge, is considerably smaller, a place where the nearest hospital requires a significant drive and where county law enforcement must cover an enormous geographic footprint with limited personnel. It is in Leannah that this case begins. The defendant is Nichole Lynn Boyer. She was 28 years old at the time of the relevant events. She was the mother of a boy approaching his 3rd birthday. Her son had been diagnosed with spina bifida, club feet, and hydrocephalus, a constellation of serious medical conditions requiring consistent specialist attention, regular monitoring, and a level of dedicated caregiving that went far beyond what a typically developing child demands. He was entirely dependent on his mother for his survival. In October of 2025, Boyer contacted the Beaverhead County Sheriff's Office to report that her son had died. When deputies arrived at the Leannah residence, they found the child's remains in an upstairs bedroom. Forensic examination and investigation indicated that the child had been deceased for a significant period of time prior to law enforcement's arrival. During that period, no emergency services had been called. No healthcare provider had been contacted. No welfare check had been requested. Upon the arrival of deputies, Boyer made a statement that was recorded in investigative reports. She asked to be taken to jail. The investigation was conducted by the Beaverhead County Sheriff's Office in coordination with the Montana Department of Justice's Division of Criminal Investigation. Investigators reviewed communications, conducted extensive interviews, and examined the full circumstances of the child's final weeks. According to statements Boyer made to investigators, as reported by KRTV Great Falls, East Idaho News, and the Law and Crime Network, she told law enforcement that in September of 2025, she had become overwhelmed by the demands of caring for her medically complex son. She acknowledged, in her own words, that she had failed to prioritize him. She provided no account of having sought any form of medical assistance or intervention during the period in question. Boyer was charged with deliberate homicide. This was a legally significant charging decision. Montana's deliberate homicide statute requires proof that the defendant purposely or knowingly caused the death of another person. Applying that standard to a death arising from extended failure to provide care required a prosecutorial determination that Boyer's sustained decision not to seek medical intervention for a critically ill, medically dependent child rose beyond the level of negligence or recklessness, that it constituted a knowing act with foreseeable lethal consequences. Boyer entered a plea of not guilty in Beaverhead County District Court in October of 2025. The case was pending as of this documentary's production in early 2026. The scope of the legal proceedings expanded further when, in January of 2026, Boyer's father, Christopher Cox, was separately charged with negligent homicide. Investigators determined that Cox had been in contact with Boyer during the relevant period and had knowledge bearing on the child's circumstances. The negligent homicide charge against Cox reflects a prosecutorial determination that his conduct met a different and lower threshold of culpability than the deliberate homicide charge filed against Boyer. Knowledge of a substantial risk combined with a failure to act, rather than the purposeful withholding of care alleged against his daughter. The filing of charges against both Boyer and her father reflects the thoroughness of an investigation that worked to account for every adult who was in a position to know what was happening to that child and chose not to intervene. A child with spina bifida, club feet, and hydrocephalus is ordinarily connected, under functioning circumstances, to a network of healthcare providers, pediatric specialists, and potentially social services caseworkers. The breakdown of those monitoring connections, the circumstances that permitted a medically fragile child to go without documented medical contact for weeks prior to his death, raises questions about how rural Montana child welfare systems identify and respond to at-risk children in geographically isolated communities. These are questions that the court proceedings in Dillon may be called upon to address. Boyer has entered a not guilty plea and is entitled to the full presumption of innocence as those proceedings continue. The court process will determine, through the presentation of evidence and the application of Montana law, what legal accountability attaches to what happened to her son. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Hit the bell icon so every new episode comes straight to you. Drop a comment and let us know your thoughts on this case. Case 2. Leannah Gardipe. November 19, 2021. Missoula County District Court, Missoula, Montana. Missoula, Montana sits in a wide valley carved by the Clark Fork River, ringed on all sides by mountain ranges that turn deep blue at dusk. It is a university town, home to the University of Montana, with a population of approximately 75,000 people. It has a strong civic identity, a walkable downtown, and a reputation as one of the more progressive cities in a traditionally conservative state. People move to Missoula because they believe in a certain kind of life. Clean air, good schools, the sense that this is a place where families can put down roots and children can grow up safely. On the night of November 19, 2021, a grandmother in Missoula picked up the phone and called 911. She had been trying to reach her daughter. The calls were not being answered. She was worried enough to ask for someone to go to the house, a residence on Patty and Drive, and check on her grandchildren. That call initiated a response from the Missoula County Sheriff's Office that would result in one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in recent Missoula County history. The defendant's name is Leannah Gardipe. She was 34 years old at the time of the incident. She was the mother of 2 children, a 5-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter. Both children lived with her at the Patty and Drive address. Both children were her legal responsibility on the night in question. When deputies arrived at the residence and made entry, they found both children in their beds. Both children were deceased. Both had died as a result of injuries consistent with stabbing. A knife was recovered at the scene. Gardipe was located and taken into custody. She was charged with 2 counts of deliberate homicide under Montana law. Deliberate homicide in Montana, defined under Montana Code Annotated Section 45-5-102, requires proof that the perpetrator purposely or knowingly caused the death of another person. It is the most serious homicide charge available under Montana's criminal statutes. The maximum penalty is life in prison. In cases involving child victims, prosecutors and sentencing courts have consistently pursued the most serious outcomes the statute allows. The investigation involved the Missoula County Sheriff's Office, the Missoula County Attorney's Office, and forensic personnel who processed the crime scene at the Patty and Drive address. Physical evidence recovered from the residence was submitted for laboratory analysis and introduced during subsequent court proceedings. Gardipe was held in the Missoula County Detention Facility and was arraigned in Missoula County District Court, where she entered an initial plea of not guilty. The case moved through the pretrial stages of Montana District Court litigation over approximately 2 years. This included discovery, motions practice, and scheduling proceedings that carried the matter into 2023. Court records indicate that a competency evaluation was conducted during the pretrial period, a standard procedural step in serious felony cases where the nature of the alleged offense raises questions about the defendant's mental state at the time of the events. The results of that evaluation became a material factor in how the case ultimately resolved. In August of 2023, Leannah Gardipe entered a guilty plea to 2 counts of deliberate homicide in Missoula County District Court. The guilty plea resolved the criminal charges without the necessity of a jury trial. Sentencing occurred in November of 2023. Rather than committing Gardipe to the Montana Department of Corrections in the traditional sense, the sentencing court committed her to the custody of the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. This outcome reflects a provision of Montana law that permits sentencing courts, where mental health considerations are material to both the offense and the appropriate disposition, to commit a defendant to the health department rather than to a conventional correctional facility. The disposition was reported by NBC Montana, KPX, and the Missoulian, and is consistent with the Missoula County District Court record filed in the matter. The Gardipe case drew sustained attention from both the public and the legal community because of the questions it raised about the intersection of mental health, criminal culpability, and appropriate sentencing in a case involving the deaths of 2 young children. Under Montana law, a defendant may raise a mental disease or defect defense as an affirmative matter. When a court accepts a guilty plea in a deliberate homicide case and commits the defendant to the health department rather than corrections, it reflects a judicial determination that the defendant's mental health status was material not only to the commission of the offense, but to the appropriate legal response to it. The Missoula County Attorney's Office handled the prosecution. Court records are accessible through the Montana Supreme Court's online case management system and the Missoula County District Court Clerk's Office. The 5-year-old and the 3-year-old on Patty and Drive were real children. They had names. They had a grandmother who was worried enough on the night of November 19, 2021, to make a phone call that she likely knew, on some level, could not lead anywhere good. Their mother pleaded guilty to 2 counts of deliberate homicide. The court imposed a sentence. That sentence is being carried out. The case of Leannah Gardipe is legally closed. The memory of the 2 children at its center is not something the law has the power to close. If this case has moved you, please take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Your support keeps this documentary work going. Case 3. Kevannah George Grace. April 4, 2017. Bighorn County District Court, Hardin, Montana. Bighorn County occupies the southeastern corner of Montana, stretching from the Crow Indian Reservation southward to the Wyoming border. Its communities include Hardin, Crow Agency, Lame Deer, and Pryor. It is home to the Crow Nation, whose tribal government is headquartered at Crow Agency, and to the Little Bighorn Battlefield National Monument, a site of national historical significance. The county's population is predominantly Native American, and the legal landscape governing cases arising on or near reservation land is layered with federal, tribal, and state jurisdictional considerations that shape how investigations proceed and how cases are prosecuted. Case 3 involves not a direct perpetrator of physical harm to a child, but a woman whose criminal exposure arose from her legal obligation to protect a child and to report suspected abuse. The defendant is Kevannah George Grace. The case arose in Bighorn County in connection with the death of a young child whose father, George Grace's partner, was identified by investigators as the person who directly caused the injuries that led to the child's death. George Grace was charged in connection with her failure to fulfill the obligations that Montana law places on parents and caregivers who have knowledge of ongoing abuse in the household. Montana's failure to protect framework is grounded in Montana Code Annotated Section 45-5-410-2 and related mandatory reporting provisions. These statutes create an enforceable legal duty. A parent or caregiver who knows, or through reasonable observation should know, that a child in their care is being subjected to abuse must take protective action and must report that abuse to law enforcement or child protective services. A caregiver who has that knowledge and does not act, who stands by while harm is inflicted on a child they are legally responsible for, can bear criminal accountability for the outcome of that harm. The law does not require that the caregiver committed the act of abuse. It requires only that the caregiver had knowledge, had opportunity, had the legal obligation to act, and chose not to. The failure to protect doctrine has been applied in courts across the United States and has generated substantial legal and academic discussion. Critics of the doctrine argue that it can impose criminal liability on individuals who are themselves victims of domestic violence, people who may fear retaliation for contacting authorities, and who may lack the practical ability to protect a child even when they are aware harm is occurring. Proponents argue that children have a fundamental right to protection that cannot be compromised by the domestic circumstances of their caregivers, and that the law must hold every adult accountable who had the knowledge, the opportunity, and the legal responsibility to act and chose not to. Montana courts have applied this doctrine in multiple cases across the state's history, and the Bighorn County prosecution of Kevannah George Grace is its application to a specific child, a specific household, and a specific set of circumstances. Cases involving crimes on or near tribal lands in Montana carry a layered jurisdictional complexity that affects every aspect of how an investigation is conducted. Under the Federal Major Crimes Act and related statutes, certain serious offenses committed by or against Native Americans on tribal land fall within exclusive federal jurisdiction. Other offenses may be prosecuted by state authorities, tribal authorities, or concurrent jurisdictions depending on the identity of the parties, the nature of the land, and the category of the offense. Bighorn County, where the Crow Nation's reservation and the surrounding state jurisdiction territory intersect, presents a particularly complex picture. Law enforcement decision-making in cases like the George Grace matter involves coordination among county sheriff's deputies, tribal law enforcement, Bureau of Indian Affairs officers, State Division of Criminal Investigation personnel, and potentially federal investigators, all operating under different legal frameworks and different protocols for evidence sharing and case referral. This complexity can affect investigation timelines and the availability of public records, which is a factor in the documentation of this case. What the Bighorn County record reflects is a prosecution grounded in the legal principle that a parent who knows a child is being harmed and who does not act to stop it or report it shares legal responsibility for what happens to that child. That principle was applied in a courtroom in Hardin, Montana, in connection with the death of a child whose father was identified as the direct perpetrator. The legal system reached both of them, and the child, who had no ability to report what was happening or to seek protection from anyone outside the household, was the reason the system reached as far as it did. Like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, and leave a comment below. Your support is what makes this documentary work possible. Case 4. Lana Marie Harasymczuk. October 2021, June 2025. Yellowstone County District Court, Billings, Montana. Billings is Montana's largest city, with a population of approximately 115,000 people. It is the commercial and medical hub of eastern Montana, home to 2 major hospital systems, a regional airport, and an economy anchored in energy, agriculture, and healthcare. It is a city of neighborhoods and schools and families, and it is the setting for a case that spans 4 years of investigation and legal proceedings involving a 4-year-old child named Jackson Gatlin, a stepfather convicted of deliberate homicide, and a mother whose criminal exposure arose not from the act of violence itself, but from her conduct before and after it. Jackson Gatlin was 4 years old and had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Children with autism may have difficulty communicating distress in conventional ways, may not respond to pain or injury as a typically developing child would, and are particularly vulnerable in environments where a caregiver exercises unchecked authority over them. Jackson's diagnosis is documented in court records and public reporting and is legally relevant to the case. His stepfather, Christopher Harasymczuk, was the person investigators determined had directly caused the injuries that killed him. Christopher's case proceeded to a jury trial in Yellowstone County District Court. In June of 2025, nearly 4 years after Jackson's death, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on deliberate homicide. The court sentenced Christopher Harasymczuk to 80 years in the Montana Department of Corrections. Lana Marie Harasymczuk, Jackson's mother, was separately charged with 3 counts of felony child endangerment and 3 counts of evidence tampering. These charges reflect the prosecution's determination that her conduct both before and after Jackson's death contributed to the circumstances in which the child was harmed and complicated the investigation that followed. According to reporting by KRTV Great Falls, KTVQ Billings, and the Billings Gazette, Lana initially provided investigators with a version of events that was inconsistent with the physical evidence. She later acknowledged that Christopher was the last adult with Jackson before the discovery of his injuries. The evidence tampering charges arose from investigative findings related to her conduct in the period following the incident, actions and statements that investigators determined had impeded their ability to reconstruct what had happened to Jackson. Montana's child endangerment statute requires proof that the defendant knowingly placed a child in a situation that exposed the child to a substantial risk of death or serious bodily injury. The prosecution's position in Lana's case was that she placed a 4-year-old child with autism, a child with a limited capacity to communicate what was happening to him, in a dangerous domestic environment by allowing circumstances that created an ongoing and substantial risk to his safety. The case presented the kind of legally nuanced question that Montana courts have addressed in multiple contexts. What are the criminal obligations of a parent who is not the direct perpetrator of harm, but who is in a position to know that harm is occurring or is likely to occur? Lana Harasymczuk's bail was set at $100,000 at arraignment. Her case was proceeding through Yellowstone County District Court as of the most recent available reporting. She has not been convicted on the pending charges and is entitled to the full presumption of innocence as those proceedings continue. The Yellowstone County Attorney's Office, which also prosecuted Christopher, is handling the case against her. The 80-year sentence imposed on Christopher Harasymczuk reflects the jury's verdict and the court's assessment of appropriate punishment for the deliberate killing of a 4-year-old child. The pending proceedings against Lana will determine, through evidence and the application of law, what accountability attaches to her role in the circumstances of Jackson's death. What is not in legal dispute is that Jackson Gallatin existed, that he was 4 years old, that he had autism, and that he died. A jury said so. A judge imposed 80 years in response to that finding. And the courts of Yellowstone County, Montana, are not finished with this case. Thank you for watching Cold Case Hour. Please like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Leave a comment and share this episode with someone who cares about how the justice system handles cases like Jackson's. Case 5. Amanda Rose Steffen. June 2012. Yellowstone County District Court, Billings, Montana. Billings, Montana appears twice in this documentary. In Case 4, with the story of Lana Marie Harasymczuk and 4-year-old Jackson Gallatin, and now again in Case 5. That Montana's largest city should appear more than once in this record is a measure not of anything particular to Billings, but of the simple statistical reality that in any examination of serious cases across a state, the most populous city will inevitably carry a disproportionate share of them. Billings has the hospitals, the courts, the law enforcement infrastructure, and the population density that concentrate these cases in its record. And in June of 2012, in a Billings apartment, a 3-month-old child named Rosanna Fox died. The defendant is Amanda Rose Steffen. She was in her early 20s at the time of the relevant events. She was the mother of Rosanna Fox, the child she shared with her partner, Jeffrey James Fox. The two lived together in a Billings apartment when Rosanna was born. What the investigation ultimately established about the circumstances of Rosanna's death was documented not through forensic evidence gathered at the time, but through a confession Steffen provided nearly 2 years later when she approached law enforcement in California voluntarily. In April of 2014, Steffen walked into the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department in Rohnert Park, California, and told investigators that she was responsible for her daughter's death. She provided a detailed self-incriminating account of her conduct during the period of Rosanna's life. That account became the foundation of the criminal case against her and was central to all subsequent proceedings in Yellowstone County District Court. In June of 2012, Billings police had been called to the apartment after Rosanna was found unresponsive. An ambulance transported the infant to the hospital, where she was pronounced deceased. An autopsy was conducted. The medical examiner's findings identified injuries consistent with foul play, but could not establish a conclusive cause of death from physical evidence alone. Without additional evidence, the case did not result in immediate charges. Steffen relocated to California. The case remained open in Yellowstone County. When Steffen provided her voluntary confession to Sonoma County authorities in April of 2014, the Billings Police Department was immediately contacted. A holding order was issued by Yellowstone County. Steffen was booked into the Sonoma County Jail on a no-bail warrant and subsequently extradited to Montana to face charges in Yellowstone County District Court. She was charged with 5 felony counts including negligent homicide, aggravated assault, criminal endangerment, and 2 counts of assault on a minor. The breadth of the charging document reflected the duration of the conduct Steffen had described in her confession. A course of conduct spanning the entirety of her daughter's 3 months of life. Separately, Jeffrey James Fox, Rosanna's father, was also charged. Fox pleaded guilty in August of 2014 to negligent homicide, admitting that he had failed to take protective action on behalf of his daughter. His plea agreement carried a recommended sentence of 20 years at the Montana State Prison with a designation as a persistent felony offender. He was sentenced accordingly. Steffen entered a guilty plea to child abuse and negligent homicide. Her case proceeded to a contested sentencing hearing before Yellowstone County District Court Judge Mary Jane Nisley. Prior to sentencing, Steffen underwent a comprehensive mental health evaluation conducted at the Montana State Hospital in Warm Springs. The evaluation was conducted by Montana State Hospital psychologist Dr. Virginia Hill. Dr. Hill's findings, presented to the court at the sentencing hearing, established a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, a serious mental health condition combining features of schizophrenia and mood disorder, along with documented substance addiction. The clinical findings provided the court with a framework for understanding the circumstances of the case within the context of Steffen's diagnosed mental health conditions. Steffen appeared at her sentencing hearing by video conference from the Montana State Hospital. She addressed Judge Nichole directly, acknowledged responsibility for her conduct, and stated that she had not wanted to carry the weight of what she had done indefinitely, which she cited as her reason for approaching law enforcement voluntarily in California. She requested a partially suspended sentence. The Yellowstone County Deputy County Attorney Julie Patton addressed the court on behalf of the state, presenting the prosecution's position on the appropriate legal response to the circumstances of Rosanna's death. Judge Nichole's sentencing decision reflected a careful weighing of the mental health evidence against the nature and duration of the conduct established in the record. The court sentenced Steffen to 40 years committed to the Montana State Hospital, not to the Montana Women's Prison, but to the custody of the state mental health system. This disposition reflected the court's acceptance of the diagnosed mental illness as a material factor in the appropriate legal response, consistent with Montana's statutory framework for cases where mental health conditions are established as central to the offense. Steffen would be eligible for parole consideration after serving 1/4 of her sentence. The court declined to suspend any portion of the 40-year term. The Steffen case is notable in this documentary's lineup for several reasons. It is a case resolved not by forensic investigation or witness testimony, but by the defendant's own voluntary decision to approach law enforcement nearly 2 years after the events in question. It is a case in which both parents faced criminal prosecution, with the father's guilty plea to negligent homicide establishing that the failure to protect Rosanna was not limited to one adult in the household. And it is a case in which the sentencing court navigated the same complex intersection of serious documented mental illness and serious documented harm to a child that appears elsewhere in this documentary, an intersection that Montana's courts have addressed in multiple contexts, and that the legal system continues to grapple with. Rosanna Fox was 3 months old. The courts of Montana spent the better part of 2 years determining what accountability should follow. Thank you for watching Cold Case Hour. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. Leave a comment below and tell us your thoughts on how the court handled the mental health dimensions of this case. Case 6. Whisper Rayne Hawkbear. April 21, 2023. Cascade County District Court, Great Falls, Montana. Great Falls, Montana is a city that appears in this documentary more than once, a measure of how concentrated these cases can be, and how no community, regardless of its size or character, is insulated from the circumstances that produce them. The city sits on the Missouri River in north-central Montana, and the Cascade County District Court has processed some of the most serious child death prosecutions in the state's recent history. In the early hours of April 21, 2023, that court system was set in motion again. The defendant is Whisper Rayne Hawkbear. She was 20 years old at the time of the incident. She was the mother of 2 children, a 2-month-old son named Ezekiel Contreras and a 16-month-old daughter. Both children were in her care at her apartment in the Rockrest Commons complex in Great Falls on the night of April 20th and the early hours of April 21st, 2023. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, Hawkbear placed a call to 911. Dispatch records reflect that she was in a state of distress during that call and then canceled it. At 4:15 in the morning, she placed a second call and requested assistance. When Great Falls Police Department officers arrived at the apartment, Hawkbear met them at the door. Officers observed that 2-month-old Ezekiel required immediate medical attention and began emergency resuscitation procedures. Ezekiel was transported to Benefice Health System in Great Falls, where he was pronounced deceased at 5:17 in the morning. Officers also attended to Hawkbear's 16-month-old daughter, who was found to have sustained injuries requiring medical treatment. The Cascade County Sheriff and coroner conducted an autopsy. The cause of Ezekiel's death was determined to be multiple blunt force injuries. The manner of death was ruled a homicide. Hawkbear was arrested and booked into the Cascade County Detention Center on April 21, 2023. During a recorded police interview conducted following her arrest, Hawkbear provided investigators with a detailed statement that became central to the prosecution's case. Her statement, as documented in court records and reported by KRTV Great Falls, Montana Right Now, and the Electric Great Falls, included a full account of the events of that night, an acknowledgement that she had been aware of Ezekiel's condition after the incident, and a disclosure that she had been experiencing significant mental health distress since February of 2023. The statement established the factual foundation upon which the Cascade County Attorney's Office built its case. Court records also document that the father of the children, who was out of state at the time of the incident, had contacted Great Falls authorities on April 19, 2 days before the incident, to request a welfare check, stating concerns about the children's well-being. The welfare check requested on April 19 had not been conducted prior to the events of April 21. This detail was noted in the court record and became part of the broader factual picture of the case. Cascade County prosecutors charged Hawkbear with deliberate homicide in connection with Ezekiel's death and assault on a minor in connection with the injuries sustained by her daughter. The deliberate homicide charge, Montana's most serious homicide statute, reflected the prosecutorial determination that the evidence supported proof of purposeful or knowing conduct resulting in Ezekiel's death. Hawkbear entered a guilty plea to deliberate homicide in March of 2025. As part of the plea agreement, the assault on a minor charge related to the surviving daughter was dismissed. The guilty plea acknowledged Hawkbear's criminal responsibility and established the factual basis required by Cascade County District Court for the acceptance of a plea to the charge. Sentencing took place on June 23, 2025, before Cascade County District Court Judge John Parker. The hearing lasted approximately 1.5 hours. The court received statements from Ezekiel's family, from Great Falls Police Officer Caleb Larson, who had been serving as the foster parent for Hawkbear's surviving daughter since April of 2023, and from Hawkbear's stepmother and defense attorneys. Hawkbear's defense team presented the court with a comprehensive account of her background, including childhood trauma, periods in foster care and group home placements, limited family support infrastructure, and mental health challenges, including what her attorneys characterized as severe postpartum depression at the time of the incident. Her defense counsel requested a sentence of 60 years with 40 years suspended. Hawkbear addressed the court directly at the sentencing hearing. She accepted responsibility for her conduct, acknowledged the permanence of the outcome, and expressed a commitment to continued treatment. Judge John Parker imposed a sentence of 100 years at the Montana Women's Prison with no portion suspended, making the full 100 years the executed term. The court ordered that Hawkbear would be ineligible for parole for the first 30 years of her sentence. Credit was granted for 795 days served since her April 2023 arrest. Cascade County Attorney Joshua Rackey confirmed the sentencing outcome in public statements following the hearing. The 100-year sentence with a 30-year parole bar and no suspended time placed the Hawkbear case among the most significant sentencing outcomes in Cascade County's recent legal history. Ezekiel Contreras was 2 months old. His father had been concerned enough about his welfare to contact law enforcement 2 days before his death. A Great Falls police officer became the foster parent to his surviving sister. The Cascade County courts processed the investigation, the charges, the guilty plea, and the sentence. The record of those proceedings is permanent. The 100-year sentence is being served. Like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, and hit the notification bell. The Hawkbear case raises significant questions about postpartum mental health resources, child welfare response times, and the obligations of the legal system to both victims and defendants. Leave a comment below and tell us your thoughts. Case 7. Patricia Batts. February 2020. Gallatin County District Court, Bozeman, Montana. West Yellowstone, Montana sits at the western entrance to Yellowstone National Park, just inside the Montana state line at an elevation of nearly 6,700 feet. It is a small community of fewer than 2,000 permanent residents whose economy revolves around tourism and gateway services to one of the most visited national parks in the country. It is a tight-knit community where the school is small enough that every student is known to staff and where events affecting a family are felt across the entire town. In February of 2020, 12-year-old James Alexander Hurley, known to his family and community as Alex, was found deceased at the home of his grandmother, Patricia Batts, in West Yellowstone. Alex had moved to West Yellowstone to be with his father, Tommy Tate, following a serious accident that had left Tommy a paraplegic. When Tommy Tate died in 2018 from complications related to that injury, Alex remained in the household of his grandmother, Patricia Batts, and her husband, James Sasser Jr. The investigation that followed Alex's death in February of 2020 was conducted by the West Yellowstone Police Department, the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office, and state investigators. The West Yellowstone Police Chief stated publicly that responding officers immediately recognized, upon arriving at the Batts residence, that the circumstances they encountered went beyond a medical situation. The investigation that followed was extensive, involving the review of physical evidence, digital evidence including video recordings, witness interviews across multiple household members, and coordination between local law enforcement and state investigative personnel. Patricia Batts was charged with 5 felony counts: deliberate homicide, aggravated kidnapping, criminal child endangerment, strangulation of a partner or family member, and tampering with a witness or informant. The Gallatin County Attorney's Office filed notice of intent to seek the death penalty, a reflection of the prosecutorial assessment of the severity of what the investigation had uncovered. In January of 2023, the county attorney withdrew the death penalty notice. In May of 2023, Batts entered a guilty plea to 3 of the 5 counts: deliberate homicide, criminal child endangerment, and tampering with a witness or informant. The plea was the product of negotiations between Batts' defense counsel and the state attorney general's office, which handled the prosecution in coordination with the Gallatin County Attorney's Office. The investigation identified 5 individuals who bore criminal responsibility for the circumstances of Alex's death. Each was prosecuted separately. James Sasser Jr., Batts' husband and Alex's step-grandfather, pleaded guilty to deliberate homicide, child endangerment, and tampering with a witness, and was sentenced to 100 years in the Montana Department of Corrections in March of 2022. James Sasser III, a 15-year-old member of the household at the time, was processed through the Youth Justice Framework and sentenced to serve until the age of 18, followed by probation until the age of 25. Gage Roush, an 18-year-old family associate, received a 5-year deferred sentence and required counseling after pleading guilty to felony assault on a minor. Madison Sasser received a youth probation sentence with the Montana Department of Corrections until the age of 21, followed by extended probation. Patricia Batts, as the grandmother and head of the household, was the last of the 5 defendants to be sentenced, making her case the concluding chapter of a multi-defendant legal proceeding that spanned more than 3 years in the Gallatin County courts. The sentencing hearing for Patricia Batts took place on August 22, 2023, before Gallatin County District Court Judge John Brown. The hearing included statements from Alex's family members, including his mother, Alicia Davis, who declined to give her statement on the public record, stating that her words to Batts would remain in private letters. Other family members addressed the court directly, and their statements are preserved in the Gallatin County District Court record. The prosecution presented the court with evidence that included video recordings reviewed during the investigation, material that Judge Brown described at sentencing as the most disturbing he had encountered during his time on the bench. The court's findings established that Alex had been subjected to a sustained pattern of conduct by multiple household members over an extended period, that he had been withdrawn from public school, removing him from an institutional environment where his circumstances might have been observed and reported, and that Batts, as the head of the household, bore the primary adult responsibility for the environment in which Alex lived and died. Batts addressed the court at the sentencing hearing. She expressed regret and acknowledged failing to be the grandmother she should have been. She referenced the loss of her son, Alex's father, Tommy Tate, as a period during which she described losing herself. Judge Brown's sentencing statement made clear that the court had considered those representations carefully and found that they did not alter the legal outcome that the record supported. The court imposed a sentence of life in prison at the Montana State Women's Prison for the deliberate homicide conviction, with 2 concurrent 10-year sentences for the criminal child endangerment and witness tampering convictions. Life in prison was the sentence the Gallatin County District Court determined the record demanded. Alex Hurley was 12 years old. He had moved to West Yellowstone to be near his father. When his father died, he stayed. The Gallatin County courts processed 5 defendants, 5 guilty pleas, and 5 sentences in response to what happened to him in that household. The last of those sentences, life in prison, was imposed on the grandmother in whose home he lived. The Montana State Women's Prison now holds her. The Gallatin County District Court record holds everything else. Like this video, subscribe to Cold Case Hour, and hit the notification bell. The Bats case involved 5 defendants, a community in grief, and a court record that took more than 3 years to complete. Leave a comment below and tell us your thoughts. We read every one. Case 8. Alicia Jo Hocter. February 2009. Cascade County District Court, Great Falls, Montana. Great Falls, Montana, sits at the edge of the high plains where the Rocky Mountain front begins its rise to the west, positioned along a series of waterfalls on the Missouri River that Lewis and Clark documented in 1805. It is the city where Case 10, the summer ManyWhiteHorses case, also unfolded. It is a city with a significant military presence anchored by Malmstrom Air Force Base, a regional hospital system, and a working-class identity rooted in agriculture, manufacturing, and the energy sector. In February of 2009, it became the setting for a child abuse case that resulted in a 30-year prison sentence, a landmark civil judgment against the state of Montana, and a legal record that has been examined by Montana's courts at every level. The defendant is Alicia Jo Hocter. She was the live-in girlfriend of Jacob Arnott, a Great Falls man who was the father of a 6-month-old daughter named Serafina. Serafina lived in the household Hocter shared with Arnott. On a day in February of 2009, while Serafina's father was away from the apartment, Hocter was alone with the infant. What happened in that apartment on that day was documented by emergency responders, medical personnel, and ultimately a Cascade County jury. When Arnott returned approximately 1 hour later, he found Serafina in acute medical distress and called 911. Emergency responders transported the infant to the hospital. At the hospital, physicians documented injuries that were immediately and unmistakably the product of inflicted physical trauma. Serafina was 6 months old. She survived, but the injuries she sustained in that apartment caused permanent brain damage, permanent blindness, seizures, and disabilities requiring lifetime care. The investigation was conducted by the Great Falls Police Department and the Cascade County Attorney's Office. Prosecutors initially charged Hocter with attempted homicide, reflecting the severity of the injuries and their assessment of the intent behind them. A Cascade County jury heard the evidence at trial. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on 2 counts, aggravated assault and criminal endangerment. The verdict on the lesser charges rather than the attempted homicide charge reflected the jury's findings on the specific elements of each charge as applied to the evidence presented. Sentencing took place in July of 2010. Cascade County District Judge Dirk Sandifer imposed the maximum sentence available, 30 years in the Montana Department of Corrections without the possibility of parole. The imposition of the maximum sentence, with no parole eligibility, reflected the court's assessment of the severity of what had been done to a 6-month-old child, the permanence of the injuries inflicted, and the complete defenselessness of the victim. Hocter, at sentencing, apologized and stated that she believed she deserved punishment. She was committed to the Montana Women's Prison in Billings, where she has been incarcerated since. The criminal proceedings were not the end of Serafina's case in the courts of Montana. It emerged through civil litigation that the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services Child and Family Services Division had received multiple reports of concern about Serafina's welfare before the February 2009 incident. In December of 2008, 2 months before the assault, a physician who examined Serafina at the emergency room documented unexplained bruising on the infant's abdomen and reported the findings to the DPHHS Child Abuse and Neglect Hotline. A Child and Family Services caseworker investigated, conducted a home visit, reviewed the available information, and determined that Serafina was safe in the home. In January of 2009, 2 additional reports were made to DPHHS, one involving a smell of marijuana and the sound of a crying child from the apartment, and one from a nurse who observed the child left unattended at the hospital. The January reports did not produce further protective action. In February of 2009, Serafina was permanently injured in that apartment. Serafina, through a court-appointed guardian, filed a civil lawsuit against the state of Montana in 2013, alleging that DPHHS had been negligent in its failure to investigate and act on the reports it received before the assault. The civil proceedings moved through Cascade County District Court over many years. In November of 2021, a Cascade County jury found the state of Montana liable for its failure to protect Serafina and awarded her damages of $16,652,538, covering future care costs, past personal care assistance, loss of her established course of life, lost earnings capacity, and mental and emotional suffering. It was one of the largest civil awards in Montana history against a state agency in a child welfare failure case. The state of Montana appealed the verdict to the Montana Supreme Court. In March of 2024, the Montana Supreme Court vacated the jury's verdict and remanded the case for a new trial, finding that the district court had erred by determining as a matter of law that the state was negligent and that the assault was foreseeable. Issues the Supreme Court concluded were material factual disputes that should have gone to the jury rather than being resolved by the court. The civil litigation, as of this documentary's production, was therefore returned to Cascade County for retrial. The criminal conviction of Alicia Jo Hocter and the 30-year sentence were not affected by the Supreme Court's ruling on the civil matter. The Hocter case is unique among the 10 cases in this documentary in that it generated both a criminal conviction and a sweeping civil proceeding against a state agency for its failure to intervene. It placed in sharp public relief the question of what child welfare systems owe to children who are reported to them as potentially at risk, and what the legal and financial consequences should be when those systems fail to act and a child suffers permanent harm as a result. Serafina Wilson is the name recorded in the civil court documents as the victim in the state's liability proceedings. She is now in her mid-teens. She attends a school for blind and deaf students. She requires live-in care. She has legal advocates who have spent more than a decade fighting for her in the courts of Montana. She did not choose any of this. She was 6 months old in February of 2009. The courts of Montana have been processing what happened to her ever since. Like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Hour. Hit the notification bell. Leave a comment below. The Hocter case raises profound questions about the responsibility of child welfare systems, not just individual defendants. We want to hear your thoughts. Case 9. Audria Nickerson. September 25, 2019. Silver Bow County District Court, Butte, Montana. Butte, Montana, occupies a singular place in American history. At the beginning of the 20th century, it was one of the largest cities west of Chicago, a copper mining boomtown whose population once exceeded 100,000 and whose mines produced a significant portion of the copper that powered the electrification of the United States. The Anaconda Company's dominance of Butte left a physical and cultural mark on the city that remains visible more than a century later. The Berkeley Pit, an enormous open-pit copper mine that filled with toxic water after pumps were shut off in 1980, is one of the largest Superfund sites in the country. Butte's current population is approximately 34,000 people. It retains its identity as a working-class, historically Irish and Eastern European Catholic city, with a dense historic urban core built on a hillside above the pit. And it is in Butte, in the early hours of September 25, 2019, that this case begins. The defendant is Audria Nickerson. She was an adult resident of the Butte area and the mother of a 5-month-old daughter. On the night in question, Nickerson was using methamphetamine inside a vehicle parked near the Butte Police Department headquarters on West Park Street. She fell asleep while under the influence of the drug, in a physical position in which her body was on top of her 5-month-old daughter. The infant suffocated. Butte Police Department officers responded to the vehicle, forced entry, and attempted emergency resuscitation. The 5-month-old could not be revived. The child's death was caused by positional asphyxia, a condition in which a person's position prevents adequate breathing. In an infant who lacks the physical strength and motor control to reposition herself, and whose airway is easily blocked, positional asphyxia progresses to death within minutes. The medical examiner's findings established the cause of death with clinical clarity. The investigation was conducted by the Butte Police Department and the Silver Bow County Attorney's Office. The evidentiary picture was established through the officers' direct observations at the scene, the medical examiner's findings, and the results of toxicological testing. The case against Nickerson was built on the straightforward application of Montana's negligent homicide statute to the documented facts. A mother, impaired by methamphetamine, fell asleep on top of her infant daughter and caused her death. The charge of negligent homicide under Montana Code annotated Section 45-5-104 reflects a prosecutorial determination that Nickerson's conduct, using methamphetamine as the sole caregiver of a 5-month-old and falling asleep in a position of direct physical danger to the child, constituted criminal negligence, a gross deviation from the standard of care that any reasonable person exercising minimal parental responsibility would have observed. Following the incident, Nickerson did not remain in Montana. According to court records and reporting by the Associated Press, the Montana Standard, and the Flathead Beacon, she traveled to the state of Maine. Montana law enforcement authorities pursued her through the formal extradition process, the legal mechanism by which a fugitive who has crossed state lines is returned to the jurisdiction where charges are pending. The process required coordination between law enforcement agencies in Montana and Maine, and, in some cases, the involvement of the governors of both states. Nickerson was located in Maine, arrested, and extradited back to Montana to face charges in Silver Bow County. She entered a guilty plea to negligent homicide in March of 2021, approximately 18 months after the incident and several months following her return to Montana through extradition. Sentencing occurred in June of 2021. The Silver Bow County District Court imposed a sentence of 14 years at the Montana Women's Prison. The sentence reflected the court's assessment of the totality of the circumstances, the nature of the offense, the age and complete vulnerability of the victim, and the aggravating circumstance of Nickerson's departure from Montana in the aftermath of the incident. The Nickerson case reflects the intersection of Montana's methamphetamine epidemic and child safety that law enforcement, child welfare advocates, and public health researchers have documented extensively. Montana, like much of the rural American West, has experienced the methamphetamine crisis at a particular intensity. The state's geographic isolation, limited treatment resources, and economic challenges in rural communities have contributed to persistent and widespread methamphetamine use across many counties. The drug's physiological profile is particularly dangerous in the context of infant care. Methamphetamine produces periods of intense and prolonged wakefulness followed by a deep and unresponsive sleep. A parent who uses methamphetamine and then crashes, as the experience of that drug-induced deep sleep is known, may be physically present with a child but completely incapable of responding to that child's needs. In the case of Audria Nickerson, that incapacity was not a distant risk. It was the direct cause of her daughter's death. The 5-month-old was 5 months old. She had been alive for 5 months. The Silver Bow County District Court documented her life, her death, and the accountability that followed. Thank you for watching Cold Case Hour. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. Leave a comment and share your thoughts on this case. Your engagement makes this work possible. Case 10. Summer ManyWhiteHorses. May 29, 2008, September 5, 2008. Cascade County District Court, Great Falls, Montana. Great Falls, Montana, sits on the Missouri River in the center of the state, at the edge of the high plains where the Rocky Mountain front begins its dramatic rise to the west. It is the third largest city in Montana, with a population of approximately 60,000 people, and serves as a regional hub for north-central Montana. It is home to Malmstrom Air Force Base, a significant agricultural economy, and a history tied to the Lewis and Clark expedition, which passed through the area in 1805. It is also the setting for the final case in this documentary, a case that reached the Montana Supreme Court on appeal, resulted in a 55-year prison sentence, and remains one of the most legally significant and thoroughly documented child death cases in Montana history. The defendant is Summer ManyWhiteHorses. At the time of the relevant events, she was a resident of Great Falls and the mother of a 2-year-old son named James. James ManyWhiteHorses had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. He was, as a 2-year-old child with autism, entirely dependent on his mother for every aspect of his care, his safety, and his survival. He had no ability to seek help, to communicate distress to anyone outside his immediate household, or to take any action on his own behalf. According to court records documented extensively by NBC News, the Spokesman Review, the Flathead Beacon, and Fox News, and preserved in Montana Supreme Court case law, James ManyWhiteHorses died on or around May 28 or 29 of 2008. The cause of his death, as subsequently determined by the state medical examiner, was consistent with asphyxia. In the immediate aftermath of James's death, Summer ManyWhiteHorses made a decision that would define the legal case against her and ultimately result in a half-century sentence. She did not contact law enforcement. She did not call emergency services. She did not take James to a hospital or medical facility. She did not contact any relative, neighbor, or support person. She placed her son's body in the trunk of her vehicle. James's remains stayed in the trunk of that vehicle for approximately 3 months. During that period, Summer ManyWhiteHorses continued to reside in Great Falls and to move through the routines of her daily life. According to court records and media reporting, she continued during that period to collect government benefit payments associated with James, payments tied to his existence as a dependent in her household, payments that should have stopped at the time of his death. The collection of those payments during the period of concealment became an additional factual element of the case against her. The circumstances that brought the concealment to light were unrelated to any investigation of James's disappearance. On September 5, 2008, approximately 3 months after James died, ManyWhiteHorses was arrested on a charge of driving under the influence. In connection with that arrest, and its aftermath, she revealed to authorities the location of her son's remains. Law enforcement officers recovered James's remains from the trunk of the vehicle. The body was submitted to the state medical examiner's office for forensic examination. The findings of that examination, combined with the circumstances of the discovery, the statements ManyWhiteHorses made to investigators, and the evidence related to the benefit payments, provided the complete factual foundation for the criminal charges that followed. ManyWhiteHorses was charged with negligent homicide, in connection with the circumstances surrounding James's death, and evidence tampering, in connection with her concealment of his remains over the 3-month period following his death. Evidence tampering under Montana law encompasses conduct that conceals, destroys, or alters physical evidence in a matter that is or may become the subject of a criminal investigation. Placing the body of a child whose death may constitute a criminal matter in a vehicle trunk and concealing it for 3 months is the application of that statute to its most literal possible set of facts. ManyWhiteHorses entered a guilty plea to both charges, negligent homicide and evidence tampering, in June of 2009. The guilty plea established the factual basis for both counts and resolved the criminal proceedings without a jury trial. Sentencing occurred in August of 2009. The Cascade County District Court imposed a combined sentence of 55 years. This sentence was exceptional in the context of the charges. The negligent homicide statute carries a maximum of 10 years. The evidence tampering statute and the sentencing court's authority to impose consecutive or enhanced terms for multiple counts account for the remainder. The 55-year total reflects the sentencing court's assessment of the cumulative nature of ManyWhiteHorses' conduct, a child's death, 3 months of concealment, and the ongoing collection of benefit payments associated with a deceased child throughout that period of concealment. The sentence was appealed to the Montana Supreme Court. The appeal raised questions about the appropriateness of the sentencing departure and the procedural conduct of the district court proceedings. The Montana Supreme Court, in its review of the case, affirmed the district court's judgment. The Supreme Court's opinion, publicly accessible through the Montana Supreme Court's online opinion archive, provides a detailed legal analysis of both the case and the sentencing court's reasoning, and it constitutes binding Montana precedent on the legal questions the appeal presented. The Supreme Court's affirmance of the 55-year sentence represents the highest court in the state of Montana's determination that the sentence was legally appropriate given the totality of the conduct in the record. James ManyWhiteHorses was 2 years old. He had autism. He was wholly dependent on his mother for every dimension of his life. He died in circumstances that a medical examiner documented. His remains were placed in a trunk and left there for 3 months. The Cascade County District Court, and then the Montana Supreme Court, spoke about what that meant and what consequence it carried. Summer ManyWhiteHorses received 55 years. James received a court record. It is the only memorial the legal system of Montana had the power to give him. Thank you for watching Cold Case Hour all the way to the end of this documentary. Please like this video right now, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Leave a comment and tell us which case in this documentary stayed with you. Share this video with someone who cares about the criminal justice system and the children it exists to protect. These 10 cases span nearly 20 years of Montana legal history. They involve children ranging in age from 5 months to 5 years. They involve defendants from Missoula, Butte, Billings, Great Falls, Glendive, Wolf Point, Ronan, Lima, and the reservation communities of Fort Peck and Bighorn. They move through the Montana state court system, the federal court system, reservation jurisdictions, and rural county districts that most people outside Montana have never heard of. They involve jury verdicts and guilty pleas, mental health dispositions and maximum sentences, cases fully resolved, and cases still working their way through the courts. What they share is this: in each one, a child died. In each one, a mother or caregiver was held to account by a legal system that determined the child's death was not something the law could walk past. In each one, investigators gathered evidence, prosecutors filed charges, courts held proceedings, and judges imposed sentences or ordered dispositions. In each one, the permanent record of the state reflects that a child existed and that the law responded to what happened to that child. The response is not always perfect. No legal system is. No sentence gives a child their life back. No verdict erases what was done. But the existence of the response, the fact that these cases were investigated, that these charges were filed, that these courts convened, is itself a form of recognition. It says that these children mattered. It says that the law will not look away. Cold Case Hour exists to document that record, to make it accessible, to ensure that the children in these cases are not forgotten, and that the legal proceedings that followed their deaths are available to the public that the justice system is meant to serve. We will continue this work. We will be back with another episode soon. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and remember the children whose cases we covered today. This has been Cold Case Hour. Subscribe, like, comment, share. The bell icon is right there. Use it.